Hi, class. So we are going to talk about the week 3 topic, which is the infectious disease. So today we are going to especially talk about how the disease, especially infectious disease, spread out. Also, we also look at some epidemic patterns of this infectious disease or something like that. Okay. So disease actually can be categorized into two different categories: infectious disease and non-infectious disease. Probably you guys actually can imagine infectious disease are actually disease that transmit from one individual to another individual. On the other hand, non-infectious disease are actually cannot be transmitted from one person to another's, right? So infectious disease actually transmit from others, from people to people, but non-infectious disease cannot be transmitted from people to people. Can you take an example of the infectious disease? Yes. Infectious disease might include like kind of cholera, HIV, like malaria, or flu virus, also COVID-19 virus. These diseases are infectious disease. Can you take an example of non-infectious disease then? Yeah. Non-infectious disease include like kind of cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. So these diseases cannot be transmitted from people to people, right? So you guys can understand infectious disease and non-infectious disease. Especially we're gonna focusing on these infectious disease today. Okay, yeah. So we are talking about the infectious disease, especially infectious disease are also categorized into two groups based on their mode of transmissions. So let me show this. So there are direct transmission and indirect transmissions. So infectious disease direct transmission is immediate transfer of disease agent between people to people, like from people to people, like by touching, biting, kissing, or sexual intercourse. Like kind of HIV is the one of the example of the direct transmission through the sexual intercourse, right? And COVID-19 also can be direct transmissions, directly from infected from the people to peoples by probably COVID-19 by like kind of kissing or like kind of sharing some things like this. On the other hand, indirect transmission is transmission involving an intermediate step. So this disease does not transmit people to peoples directly. There is actually intermediate steps, like kind of some step between the agent and peoples. There are two different types of mode: environment, like kind of common resources, and factors. So environment is actually common resources. We called common source on infectious agent from the same source, like contaminate water, air, or food, or something like that. please think about our like kind of class last week, the extra credit point, cholera video, how the cholera spread out. Cholera actually spread out through the contaminated waters, right? So these contaminated waters actually play intermediate steps. So people share these contaminated waters, so that's why they got choleras, right? Yeah. So peoples do not transmit the choleras to other people, but these intermediate steps actually play a roles transmitting disease like contaminated water, air, or food, these kind of things. Also, there is a factors carry over disease, like kind of mosquitoes actually carry this disease to peoples, right? So we are going to talk about this more in direct transmissions. Okay, so we are going to talk more about indirect transmissions today. Okay, yeah. So this is the epidemiological triad of disease. So especially this triad actually represent the dynamics of disease transmissions. So especially these triad actually give us understanding of the each of components of triad. So understanding these each components of triad actually allows us to prevent the infectious disease. So there are four components in this triad: host, agent, vector, environment. Environment is a common source. So we are going to talk about the each components and then how these triad of disease represent the dynamics of disease transmission, especially indirect transmissions. Okay. So first, so in this triad, the first component is host. Host indicate the person having a disease. So this host actually influenced by many different factors such as age, gender, race, or genetic profiles. So these kind of different factors affect this host, like kind of having a disease or not. For examples, let's think about the ages. Older people are more likely to get infectious disease compared to young peoples, right? Yeah. Also, older peoples are more likely to be serious if get infectious disease compared to young adult, right? And these like kind of many different factors actually influence this person host having a disease, right? Yeah. An agent indicate the cause of disease. It's not disease, cause of disease, like kind of bacteria, virus, poison, these kind of things, all the things actually cause of disease. Okay. And then common source, environment. Common source is actually allows agent is a cause of disease, right? To transmit through the common source, like contaminate water, foodborne, air pollutions, these kind of things. So this one allows agent to transmit to host through these common source. Okay, so let me give you more understanding about this by taking examples. So think about this cholera outbreak 1845 in London. So we watch the video, right? So in these examples, what would be the agent? Agent, actually the cause of disease, right? So agent should be cholera bacteria, cholera virus, right? Yeah. How about host? Who would be the host? People drinking contaminated waters, including cholera bacteria, right? From the broad street, right? So this is the host. So host is the people drinking contaminated water, including cholera bacteria from the broad street. And then environments is a common source, actually contaminated water pump in the broad street. So these bacteria transmit to the host through the disenvironment, right? Through the disenvironment. So that's why this environment is actually intermediate steps. These bacteria does not directly goes to the host, right? So there is a intermediate step, which is the contaminated waters, right? Which is the common source. Common source is a people share source, right? Yeah, so these bacteria actually go through this common source actually to the peoples, right? So people got cholera like this way, right? Yeah. So please remember how we addressed this cholera outbreak at that time. Actually, we addressed this by removing these common source. We cannot remove the cholera bacteria, but by removing these common source, actually outbreak actually finish it, right? Yes. Because these bacteria actually transmit through this common source, right? So understanding this process allows us to prevent getting this disease, right? Yeah. Okay. The next types of intermediate step is factors. So actually factor is carrier of disease. So we look at in the previous slide, we look at the common source, right? Agent actually cause of disease actually transmit through this common source, right? Yeah. But another mode of indirect transmission is factors. Actually, factors carry the disease to host, especially mosquito, like deer tick, spread out disease. So mosquito is the one of the example of these factors. So these factors, mosquitoes actually carry this cause of disease to the host. So that's why host got sick. So let me take an example of this indirect transmission through the factors. So did you hear about the microcephaly disease? So usually these disease actually pregnant women actually got this disease, get the disease, and then these pregnant women actually babies, like kind of born babies usually normal head, abnormally small head. So microcephaly is the conditions where baby's head is significantly smaller than expected, often due to the abnormal brain development. But this disease actually caused by the Zika virus. So Zika virus actually carried by the mosquitoes, usually. So in this triad, host is the pregnant woman sleeping at night without mosquito net, okay? And then agent is Zika virus. And then factors should be mosquitoes. So mosquitoes actually carry this Zika virus, and then mosquitoes actually bite pregnant women. So pregnant women bite by these mosquitoes actually had a Zika virus, and then due to this cause of this disease, like kind of this agent, they got microcephaly. Especially this disease, actually, microcephaly is very popular in South America. So if you travel, especially pregnant women actually travel to the South America, please be careful that these Zika virus and mosquitoes. So if you know this, and then if you are pregnant, for examples, if you go to South America, probably you are very, very cautious about the get bite by the mosquitoes, right? Yeah. So we talk about the two different disease in indirect transmission mode. One is the common source mode. So people share common source like kind of contaminated water pump. So this disease actually transmit to people. And another one is factors. Factors actually carry the cause of disease to peoples, right? Yeah, so we talk about the indirect transmissions, different types of indirect transmission factor and environment, which is a common source, right? Yeah. So again, disease transmission, direct transmission is a people to people directly. Indirect transmission is there is involving an intermediate step. And then we actually just talk about two different types of intermediate step, common source and factors, right? Yeah. Okay. So let's moving on to epidemic curve. So in the previous class, we briefly talk about what is the epidemics, right? So epidemic is defined as widespread occurrence of a disease in the community at particular time. So epidemic can be classified according to their manner of spread through the population, direct or indirect, right? So we talk about the infectious disease, direct versus indirect, right? So we also talk about the indirect factors involved or common source involved. So to understand epidemic patterns, epidemic curve usually can be used. So we're gonna talk about this epidemic curve right now. So depending on the shape of the epidemic curve, we can identify the which types of transmission, direct or indirect transmissions or something like that. So we're gonna talk about this epidemic curve. So this is the example of epidemic curves. So usually epidemic curve indicate the two different things. So this one, the columns indicate the number of cases. And then the bottoms row actually indicate the onset of symptoms. So duration of symptoms. Okay. So there are two parts in the epidemic curve. Number of cases, these columns and row actually indicate the duration of the disease or symptoms, okay? Durations, okay? Two part. Epidemic curve informs us about the patterns of the disease spread. It can help with the identification of the mode of transmission of disease, direct or indirect. Okay, so please note the number of cases for the columns, and then row, the bottoms actually indicate the duration of actually disease. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about the first type of epidemic curve, like kind of common source outbreak. We talk about the common source outbreak, right? Common source outbreak is a group of persons are all exposed to an infectious agent or toxin from the same source. So that's why that is the common source outbreak. Does not transmit to other people, right? Yeah. So there are two different types of common source outbreak: point source outbreak and continuous common source outbreak. So this point source outbreak and continuous common source outbreak, the shape of the epidemic curve should be different, right? So we're gonna talk about this one in the next slide. So first one, point source outbreak. So it is kind of the same, exposed to the same source over brief time. Over brief time. That is the key of this point source outbreak. So that's why, so people exposed to the common source over brief time. So the case rise rapidly to a peak point and fall off gradually. So majority of cases within one incubation period, and the duration of disease are very short. Because people expose the same source over brief time, so the duration of disease are short. So red or blue, red, which one actually indicate the point source outbreak? Which epidemic curve actually indicate the point source outbreak? So as I mentioned in the previous slide, so left columns indicate this one number of case, and then duration of the symptoms is the bottoms. So here is the key. Duration is short. Which one, blue or red? Yes, red is the durations actually shorter than blue, right? So that's why the red graph, red epidemic curves actually indicate the point source outbreak. So as you can see, case actually rise rapidly because people actually share this common source over brief time, right? So that's why A, the red epidemic curves actually represent point source outbreak, okay? And next types of common source outbreak. So before we moving on to this, let's take on these questions. Which of the following is an example of point source outbreak? There are three examples. Please try to find which one is an example of the point source outbreak. In order to find the answer, you need to understand these things. Exposed to the same source over brief time, right? So that is the key. If you understand this one, understand this, exposed to the same source over brief time, you can find the answer. Okay? A. 21 cases of this disease among children and workers at a daycare center over a period of the 6 weeks. No external source outbreak identified. In this example, can we find common source? No, no external source identified. So probably we can check mark X because there is no common source, right? So point source outbreak, common source, we need to find the common source, and the exposed to the common source is a short or long, right? So we need to find this one. Okay, B, 43 cases of this virus infection over 2 days traced to the ice machine on a cruise ship. How do you think? I think that this is a point source outbreak because there is a common source. What is the common source? Ice machines. People shared this ice machine. How long? 2 days, very short time, right? Shared this, and then they got norovirus. So that's why there is the point source outbreak. Okay. And then how about this? 36 cases of this disease over 6 weeks trace the occasional use of the supplementary reservoir. Okay. How about this? Can you find the common source? Yes, I can find the common source, which is the supplementary reservoir. How many days? 6 weeks. 6 weeks is longer time, so probably it's not a short time, so that's why it is not point source outbreak. So the point source outbreak is B. And then another types of the continuous common source outbreak is continuous common source outbreak. It is kind of the same with the point source outbreak in terms of exposed to the same source. But the difference is exposed to the same source over prolonged time, not the short time. Short time is actually point source outbreak, but continuous common source outbreak is actually exposed to the same source over prolonged time. Duration of this is longer than point source outbreak. So which one indicate red or blue? Which one indicate the continuous common source outbreak? Yes, blue, because duration of the disease actually symptoms, this is actually longer than this red, right? So that's why continuous common source outbreak. So which of the following is an example of a continuous outbreak? So we actually, this is the same examples. So B actually indicate the point source outbreak. So we found the common source here, but exposed to only 2 days is a brief time, right? So that is the point source. But continuous source outbreak is actually exposed to source, same source over longer time, right? So this one, occasional use of a supplemental reservoir, right? That is the common source. And then over 6 weeks, that is the longer time, right? So that's why answer should be C. Okay, the next types of epidemic curve that we're gonna talk about is propagated outbreak curve, which indicate the direct transmission. So common source outbreak, and then we actually talk about the epidemic curve for the common source outbreak, right? So this common source outbreak is actually indicate the indirect transmissions, but propagated outbreaks to actually this graph indicate the direct transmissions. So propagate outbreak gradually spread by serial of the transfer from person to persons like HIV or measles or these kind of things. In order to understand this direct transmission and this propagate outbreak, we should understand this. If someone is infected by a flu virus, the summons immediately show the clinical symptoms of the flu. Probably clinical symptoms of the flu might have like kind of a cough, like kind of a running nose, these kind of things, and then fevers like this. But once we got affected by this flu virus, this is the direct transmission, right? So immediately show that these clinical symptoms? No. Let's take an example of this. I got flu. And then you guys actually come to my class and then talk to me. And then my flu virus probably transmit to one of you guys or some of you guys. And then at that day, so you guys actually got the flu virus, right? But at that day, you guys actually had a running nose or fever? No. Why? Because of this incubation period. Actually, direct transmissions. So direct transmission, so incubation period is actually intervals from receipt of infection to the time of the onset of clinical illness. So time between exposure and onset of symptoms. So some disease incubation periods is like kind of 7 days, or some disease like kind of 5 days. Different diseases have a different incubation period, like kind of chickenpox, 14 to 16 days, HIV, 8 to 24 months. That means chickenpox, 14, 60 days. These days, people, even though they got this disease, but there is no clinical symptoms during this incubation period. That means, so people do not have a symptoms, clinical symptom. Probably they're gonna unconsciously transmit this virus to the other peoples, right? So that's the key. Incubation period is key for this propagated outbreak, especially direct transmissions. So let me take an example of this. As you can see in this graph, there are 3 actually peak point, different types of peak point. Let me explain how why these different types of, how these different peak points actually happens. So number of peoples, like these peoples actually got disease, okay? These peoples actually contact other peoples during incubation period, right? During incubation period. So I mentioned during incubation period, still people transmit disease, right? Even though they do not have clinical symptoms, right? So this group of peoples actually contact the next group of peoples during incubation period. So I contact one or three peoples, right? And then other people's got disease also contact four people. So these peak points actually increased. So, and then these secondary groups also during their incubation period, right? So they kind of also contact other peoples. It is kind of a snowballs. So peoples actually during incubation period contact peoples and then transmit disease. So that's why propagated outbreak or direct transmissions actually has multiple peak point in the curve. So 1, 2, 3. So these multiple peak point indicate the secondary case arise after exposed to the primary case. So this secondary case influenced by the first case. And then this secondary case also influenced the third group of peoples. So these multiple peak points indicate direct transmissions, especially disease actually transmit during incubation period, right? So there is an interval, right? So this interval. So these intervals actually indicate the incubation period, right? Yes. So today we talk about infectious disease, right? So infectious disease actually can be categorized into direct transmission and indirect transmissions. So also we talk about the indirect transmissions actually. There is a involving intermediate steps, right? But we also talk about the two different types of intermediate steps, factor and common source. And then we also talk about the shape of the epidemic curve. So depending on the shape of the curve, we can identify the different types of transmissions like common point source outbreak and continuous common source outbreak or propagate outbreak. Okay. So I also posted a review question for this chapter, and also I posted an online assignment for these chapters. Okay, so please let me know if you have any question about your quiz, review questions, or online assignments. Okay, thank you.